Carmel Civiloni.
Speaker, if the $300 million per week that side is borrowing for this country was going anyway to alleviate the struggles, that New Zealanders are feeling, then we could understand it. But they are doing absolutely nothing to do that. Mr. Speaker, the three things that I want to focus on today with regards to the budget announcements by that side of the House are: one, the beneficiary bashing that has begun under them; two, the impact that their budget will have on Māori and Pacific young people; and three, the social implications of the high levels of unemployment brought on by that side of the House, Mr. Speaker. I really want to start with the beneficiary bashing. I see that the government has set aside $40 million for welfare reform, Mr. Speaker, and that the Minister of Social Development will be convening a group of 7 ministers to look at the Welfare Working Group's recommendations. And I think, who will those ministers be on that working group? What do we as a country have to look forward to? Well, obviously the Minister of Social Development will be on that. A solo mother herself, who now looks down on other solo mothers, looks down her nose at other solo mothers and says, well, actually, I got the training incentive allowance, but you don't need it, sole parents. That says, well, actually, times have changed now, so you sole parents don't need the same level of support, Mr. Speaker. We have a Prime Minister who likes to go around saying that he grew up in a state house, and yet in his own electorate, where Labor had planned affordable housing, state housing to be part of the Hodsonville housing development, that same government decided, no, actually, in that area, in the Prime Minister's area, they don't actually want that type of housing, those type of people living in that specific area. We've got a Minister of Education who, when she first started, increased the fines for truancy, but in her own electorate recently refused to fund a school bus that would get kids from a poor area, a rural area, to the nearest school, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't make for a very good committee if we're looking at the possibilities of the ministers that may be on it, Mr. Speaker. When we look at the beneficiary bashing that's taking place, we are very concerned on this side of the House. It is a deliberate attempt to shift attention away from the fact that that side of the House has done absolutely nothing to create jobs, Mr. Speaker. They'd rather put the boot in to people who are already experiencing hard times so as to shift the attention away from the fact that they have done an abysmal job at leading this country. What we know of New Zealanders, Mr. Speaker, and I think this is something that we need to remind that side of the House about, is that generally Kiwis band together when times are tough. We are compassionate as New Zealanders. We do lend our neighbour a hand when they are experiencing difficulties. We don't put the boot in when they're down, which is exactly what that side of the House is attempting to do with their beneficiary bashing, Mr. Speaker. I met a solo mother on the weekend in West Auckland, Tohenare, a solo mother of 2. A solo mother whose husband left her last year. 2 kids, 1 on the way. On the weekend, Mr. Speaker, when I met her, she told me that things are so bad that actually, Mr. Henare, I know you don't care, but things are actually so bad that she can't afford to keep the 3rd baby and she will be adopting that 3rd child out because she cannot afford to look after another one. And yet that side of the House likes to put out a stigma about these sole parents as if it's their fault and as if they are bludgeoning off the system and deserve to have everything that they're getting taken away from them. That woman is struggling so much that she would put her 3rd child up for adoption because she cannot afford to look after it. And I blame that side of the House for that, Mr. Henare. Mr. Speaker, when we look at the beneficiary bashing that's taking place, we look at people like a mother that came in the other day with her 18-year-old son, a mother that's fearful that her 18-year-old son may actually commit suicide on the unemployment benefit, Mr. Speaker, but with a sickness that I won't go into detail about, but he's tried time and time again to get a job and can't get it, and she says she sees him getting more and more depressed. And she's fearful of the fact that he may actually kill himself because of the depression over the fact that he can't find employment. That side of the House has done nothing to create jobs for boys like this one. That side of the House continues to boot put the boot into people like this 18-year-old that is now considering suicide. Mr. Speaker, talking about boot, we may as well go on to boot camps. And earlier, the Minister of Social Development said that the $25 million going into these limited service training courses will be of benefit with regards to getting these young people motivated, getting them into employment, getting them into training. She says that they're not military-style courses, and yet they're run by our Defence Force. So I can't understand how they can't be military when it's the Defence Force running them. However, $25 million into these military-style training courses, prefaced on the idea that our young people have no motivation or discipline to work or to study, when the reality is they actually aren't being given the opportunities to work or study. It's not based on any lack of discipline, any lack of motivation. It's based on a lack of opportunity because that government has failed to create them for them. Mr. Speaker, I'm fearful. I'm fearful for the young Māori and Pacific people who are neither in employment or in education, because in 25 years' time, they are going to make up over 50% of New Zealand. They will make up over 50% of the workforce. And we will be reliant on them to be able to move our country forward. People like, let me think, Brash, Banks, all of those people that continue to put down and pull down equity measures, all of those people that continue to attack our young Māori and Pacific women and men are going to be reliant on those very same young Māori and Pacific men to be supporting this country. And yet that government has done absolutely nothing to invest in them. We see cuts to early childhood education, and I don't care what the Minister of Education says, they have cut money to early childhood education, and that, as Sir Dr. Gluckman has said, is where the investment needs to be made. And yet that side of the House has no understanding for the evidence and the importance of that investment for us and our future as a country. Instead, what we're seeing is continued Māori and Pacific young people that are getting thrown onto that scrap heap and then attacked by that side of the House when they can't find employment or can't get into training as being bludgers of the state, when it's simply not the case, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I'm concerned about are the social implications of the high levels of unemployment that we're facing at the moment. Recently, I was at a meeting with West Auckland lawyers, and I think some of them actually showed up to a meeting that Tauhenari held recently, and they were not impressed. Recently, I was at a meeting, and one of the senior lawyers, Mr. Speaker, said that during tough economic times, a family lawyer is not going to go without work. Those family lawyers talked about the fact that because we are facing such tough economic times, because of the fact that the government is failing to address the needs of people, what we are seeing, or what the family lawyers are seeing, are increased cases of marital splits, increased cases of domestic violence, and all of these things as a result of what the government has or hasn't been doing, Mr. Speaker. It's the social implications of the high level of unemployment and the poverty that we're facing that I'm concerned about. I was a child and a teen during the 90s. I had two parents that lost their jobs in the 90s. I have been a single mother and know how difficult that is. But, Mr. Speaker, I have never ever seen it as hard as what it is now. Parents who cannot afford to put food on the table for their kids, a mother who can't even afford to keep her third child and is adopting it out because of that. Mr. Speaker, people coming through our office who are sleeping under bridges, sleeping in cars, because on top of everything else there's a housing crisis that side of the House has failed to address. Mr. Speaker, they are running our country into the mud, and Mr. Speaker, we need to make sure as a country that on November the 26th they aren't allowed to continue, because it will only get worse, and what we're looking at are decades, repercussions that will continue for decades if that government wants to get re-elected on November 26th. Thank goodness they won't.
The Honourable Tauhenari.